Hi there and welcome back to the channel involving all things music direction. Now, since starting to produce these videos, and especially the videos surrounding the subject of sound equipment we use in today's theatres and bands and orchestras, I regularly get asked about not things specifically music direction related, but more and more about the general sound setups in our theatre productions. Over the past couple of months, I've been involved in two specific productions where the music director had clearly not had any conversations with the sound department before the band moved into the venue. And on both occasions, it was assumed all would be well and launched straight into the dress rehearsals where, of course, they expected all the sound to sound perfect straight away. And on both occasions, how they were so wrong and suffered the consequences. I've produced many videos on creating and using backing or click tracks in our productions, and they all involve connecting various pieces of kit together and ultimately working with your sound crew. So in this video, I want to look in more detail at sound in theatres, what the sound technicians are trying to create and the equipment used, and how we as musical directors can help. So stay tuned. We're gonna get technical. If you haven't done so already, then please do subscribe by hitting the red button, and do let me know if there are any specific subjects you'd like me to cover, or you can just email me directly at musicdirectoronline@gmail.com. I have mentioned on numerous occasions that as sound technology has become more and more advanced, music directors need to be keeping up with such advances. Now, I am the first to admit that I am no qualified expert on sound technology and reproduction. But what I have learnt is that when you get your band or orchestra to the venue, if you just leave it to the sound team, so to speak, you're not making life easy for yourself or for your musicians. There are many different setups that sound teams now use in our productions, from a simple vocal microphone playing to a live band through to what's known as a silent pit, where all sound from the band is being fully controlled and mixed by someone other than you and your band. But before we delve into those scenarios, let's take a short history lesson. Before, say, around late 1970s, early 1980s, virtually all musical instruments used in theatre productions were acoustic. Singers would ensure they faced the audience and projected their voices in the best way they possibly could. If we go back even further to the 19th century, in Gilbert and Sullivan's day, for instance, performers would deliver their dialogue, and then when a song came along, they would physically step forward to the front of the stage, thus ensuring that they could be heard over the orchestra. Professionally trained singers would spend much of their training, and still do of course, in breath control, and have learnt the art of projecting their voices above and beyond the volume levels of the orchestra. Then, with the onset of electronics in musical instruments, initially electric guitars, this was the start of a huge change in theatre sound and its technology. Microphones and then wireless microphone systems started to appear on stage to, should we say, enhance the vocal performance. Okay, let's be honest. Let's replace enhance with amplify the vocal performance. The next development was the appearance of electronic keyboards in theatre pits that started to replicate other instruments in the form of synthesis. The Yamaha DX7 was one of the first huge leaps in electronic synthesis, manufactured between 1983 and 1989. This was the first digital synthesizer. Bands and orchestra arrangers then started using such instruments, and as the music reproduction methods changed, the vocal reproduction technology had to keep up. So we are where we are. Musicians and sound technicians are sometimes as far apart as ever and not knowing each other's requirements and needs, and on occasions are not even aware of each other's frustrations. Been there? Yep, so have I. As music directors, we know what we're trying to achieve, or we should do. We've been working towards that throughout the entire rehearsal period. Now what we should do is look at what the sound department is trying to achieve. As a member of the audience, you've paid good money to watch and, of course, listen to the performance. No matter where you're seated in the auditorium, you need to hear quality audio that has a sense of realism. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, firstly, sound is not just about volume. It needs to be realistic. A simple sound effect, for example. There may be a case where an on-stage telephone sound is required, and it needs to sound as though it's visibly coming through the telephone on stage. If a gramophone or valve radio prop is on stage, sound of the device needs to sound as though it's coming from the actual on-stage prop. Then again, if an actor moves from stage right to stage left, wouldn't it be great if wherever you're sitting in the auditorium, it was perceived that the actor was also moving from left to right? Or right to left. Because the stage right instead. You know what I mean. So the sound department is trying to give a sense of realism and ensure everyone hears everything. But when the musical numbers start, things can get a little more complicated. The sound team are now trying to balance vocals of many different musical styles depending on the production involved with a set of live musicians. Now, this is where the music director really does need to get involved. You have spent months getting the cast ready. What you need is for the sound department to reproduce your singers and band and orchestra exactly the way in which you've been rehearsing. And for that, you need to get to know the system and some basic pieces of equipment. Let's look at the band or orchestra first. It may look like this, or maybe like this. Either way, if it has guitars or keyboards, it's going to follow a similar setup. Let's take this keyboard for example. If you're a keyboard player, you're most likely going to be offered one of these. It's called a DI box, allegedly standing for direct input, and is a device that converts an unbalanced and high impedance signal output of your instrument to a balanced low impedance level. Yeah, I said I might get a bit technical. You might remember some of those terms from your physics lessons if you were listening. But why would you want to do that? I don't mean why would you want to listen to your physics teacher. I mean, why would you want to change the output of your instrument? Well, when you do that, you can then send this signal quite a distance without any loss of signal quality, and your signal needs to travel quite a distance in most venues. You might have also seen these devices kicking around the band area. These collect the various signals from all the instruments and microphones in the band and send them through the long cable to a mixing desk, where the magic happens, but more about that shortly. After some tweaking, which I'm not going to go into in this video, we send the signal from the mixing desk to a variety of speakers around the venue so everyone can hear. But now we need to think about the vocals. Microphones have become smaller and smaller over recent years, and today are mainly tiny condenser microphones that fit onto the head. Condenser microphones are just microphones that need a power source, and that is supplied through a battery pack worn by the performer, which sends a radio signal to a receiver. In many cases, these receivers are positioned at the side of the stage. These banks of receivers can monitor signal strength and battery levels during its use in the performance. As with musical instruments, the signal is then sent to the sound desk through the multi-core setup mentioned earlier. One note to all performers watching this video, however: in many cases, if you're wearing one of these small microphones, the sound crew can listen in at any time to what's being said in the dressing room or wherever else. They say they need to check battery levels and signal strength. So be careful. Don't criticise the sound crew in the dressing room. That is a lot of equipment. But how do we hear? You see, what the audience hears isn't what you, the music director, or even the band members hear. And my oh my, can this get frustrating. Put together any group of musicians, classical or otherwise, get them to play together, and without knowing it, they will balance the sound. It's like a sixth sense. We have dynamic markings in our scores. We know when to play louder or softer, and we regulate that volume level against our fellow musicians. We know to bring out a specific solo line, for example. All this is happening without a second thought. But when playing in a theatre or venue and surrounded with microphones and electronic equipment that I've just described, most of this sixth sense goes out of the window. Musical theatre and the musicals we present usually contain huge dynamic ranges, from the quietest gentle solo, vocal or instrumental, to the heavy beat of a rock musical or tutti sections in the score. Furthermore, as music director, you may be standing in a pit at the centre of the stage, but even then, you're not in the best place to hear what the audience hears. As a player, you also need to hear other musicians, and of course, hearing the vocals would be an advantage too. With the sound department getting involved in our productions, the way we solve this is through monitoring. This subject is quite close to my heart, as I've experienced productions that I've been involved in where little, if any, communication has taken place between the MD and the sound department, to the frustration of many. As with that group of musicians subconsciously doing their own balancing I mentioned, being able to hear each other is vital. Monitor speakers in the band area, or better still a small personal monitor, is by far my personal preference. I not only need to hear myself playing as a keyboard player, I need to hear the rhythm section and the vocals. Most able and proficient sound technicians will know this and accommodate some form of monitoring. But more and more, sound crews want full control over the sound, which is fair enough if they know what they're doing. And these setups are likely to involve devices such as these. What's known as a silent pit, whereby all electronic instruments, guitars, bass guitars, keyboards, electronic percussion, etc., produces no sound whatsoever other than what is sent through the mixing desk and into the auditorium. You play these instruments and listen to yourself playing and others around you playing through these or these. You then use one of these, which in essence is a mixer to mix all the instruments in your band and any vocals you need yourself. It's supposed to give you full control. Personally, when playing in a band, I find wearing these the most uncomfortable and disconcerting experience as a musician. It's sometimes better to invest in something a little bit more comfortable and higher quality. You just get a better mix. Now, I know all this is required. I know what the sound team are trying to do. But nevertheless, I struggle every time I'm presented with this kind of setup. But you know what? I will suffer the frustration if the sound department are professional and know what they're doing. But a word of warning. Beware of those with all the gear and no idea. I have before played in a band where all 20 or so musicians had microphones for the acoustic instruments or DI boxes for the electronic instruments, but no provision had been made for any form of monitoring whatsoever. Some of us could only hear band members nearby and no vocals. Everyone needs to hear. So, given all these additional issues we face in today's performance venues involving sound and the mass of electronics we seem to be surrounded with, what can we do as music directors to help smooth this path? Gone are the days when we gather together our band or orchestra and we play with the singers that we've been working with for months. They come along, they sing with the band, and we all hope that when it comes to the technical or dress rehearsal, all will sound as intended. No, no, no. If only that was the case. Working for all the months with your cast to get the sound you want can be ruined by poor or unprepared sound technicians. But there's a lot you can do to help. I know quite a few professional sound designers and technicians that are experienced in theatre and, more importantly, in musical theatre about all the problems I've mentioned. And they all say the same thing when it comes to helping this transition. The transition of moving into the theatre. And that first is preparation. Many months before, and maybe before you took on any particular musical production, decisions regarding what musicians and instruments would be in your group would have been made. Share that information with the sound team. They will then be able to know what equipment they need. Give them a list of the instruments you intend to use and a layout of where you propose each instrumentalist is to be positioned in the venue. That may be in an offstage position. Take a look at this video if you need more information on positioning bands other than in the traditional orchestral pit position. As mentioned, many times do speak to your sound people in advance so that they know what to expect. They may also be able to advise on what electronic band members need to bring with them to the venue. What monitors do keyboards and guitarists need to bring, for instance, if at all any? And also they may need different equipment for the band or orchestra rehearsal, different to the venue location. Keep the band informed of the proposed setup too. If any pre-recorded tracks are being used, the sound team need to know in advance. Also, are they in stereo or mono? If you have booked the band or orchestra just for the dress rehearsal, you'd better be extra prepared, because you're now asking the sound team to set up and balance the entire show in one performance. That's a huge risk. That's what used to be the case decades ago when everything was acoustic. The second most important piece of advice from any sound professional, other than giving he or she advance information, is to give them time. It was a bit loud, or that was a bit quiet, or I couldn't hear the vocals, or that cue was late, I can't hear the guitar solo. Whatever it is, are all comments you cannot make if you have only given the sound team one playthrough of the musical. A musical, remember, that you've been working on for months, and you're expecting for them to get it right in the time it takes to play through the score. If there is to be a significant sound enhancement system for your production, do all you can to book the band or orchestra for the technical rehearsal. Because many of today's productions, like it or not, the music is going to involve technology. If you can't or don't do musicians for the technical rehearsals, and I can kind of understand that because it's all through reasons of cost, no doubt, then prior to start of any dress rehearsal, select at least 2 or 3 musical numbers of differing styles and get the band or orchestra to play through these. This will not only allow the sound team to make some initial mixing adjustments, but will also allow time just for the musicians themselves to make any adjustments. Then, between each of these numbers, check all musicians can hear what they need to hear to play confidently. Ask them and feed this information back to the sound team. Check with the sound team at this point also if they are hearing all the instruments. If you can get a fellow musician not directly involved in the production to sit in the auditorium and listen, even better. If you're paying, for instance, for 3 reed instruments and you can only hear 2, it needs to be identified because the sound engineer may not know the difference. I may be coming over as wanting to take the side of the sound team. I don't want to come over that way. But it is unfortunate that all proficient sound engineers are not musicians. They won't know that certain sections, for instance, the overall volume needs to swell, or that specific keyboard part or guitar passage really needs to come above the mix. All this needs time and rehearsal. So, in summary then, talk to your sound team, get involved, and don't just leave it to them to do what they think is right. Our musical productions are collaborative efforts. What your paying audience hears is as important as what they see on stage, and just leaving it to the sound team to do what you've had months to refine through a rehearsal is asking for trouble. As the music director, you were responsible for the sound of the company, the band or orchestra. You also need to take some responsibility and ownership of how that sound is being reproduced to your audience. See you next time.